Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me clearly, everybody. And I hope you've had a good lunch. There was a surprising amount of onion in my starter, which I loved, but you guys are at the right distance for any kind of social interaction. So 15 minutes is not a lot of time. I was just talking to Jill. Keynote sounds very grand. It's like change the world, but do it quickly. But I'll try and summarize for you what we think of as what I call habits and patterns of innovation. I've cheated a little bit because I've scrunched a slightly longer presentation. But the good part is the patterns are the more fun part because of the stories, and the habits is the most preachy bit, which I've left out. All right? So we'll stick to the stories. I'll take you through some stuff. Sorry, I've got a bit of a bad leg, which our PR team tell me I must refer to as a sports injury, because that makes me look good. So without further ado, just by way of introduction, as you just heard, I have a day job, which is I run innovation for Tata Consultancy Services, which is really a technology services business, working pretty much across all industries. So in my job, I get to work with a vast range of industries, manufacturing, services, financial services, insurance, the works. I also get to work in a very technology agnostic manner, although you would think right now the only technology in the world today is generative AI, because you can't get through 3 sentences without it. And I'm fortunate that I work with a very diverse team of people, and really we try and bring diversity not just in terms of the usual diversity that you would think, but neurodiversity and the ways in which we approach problem statements with kind of mindsets in terms of design and engineering and commercial. And for my sins, I wrote a book last year, and I write a innovation blog. So this is really, I do like this stuff. And I'm also trying to write a book on innovation, which my working title is kind of, why does it hurt so much? Because if any of you have worked in innovation in any large organization, you know what I mean here. And one of the nicest things about my job right now is that I'm trying to build out an innovation space in a building that you can kind of see from here. It's this space we want to bring our clients in and really bring things to life. But with that, I do want to say that I started my career, not my life, in a manufacturing business. We were making refrigerators, and I just finished economics in college and then business school, so I had really no practical skills whatsoever. And we were in this induction, and we were given this huge session on how the warehouse and the factory works. And at the end, I put up my hand and said, "What's a forklift truck?" And all the engineers jumped in to help me understand. But this one person said, they were all giving me very kind of detailed breakdown engineering definition. The one person, it's a beautiful piece of machinery. And then we became friends because he got what I was trying to get to. So I'm going to talk about these 5 patterns of innovation because I think wherever you are, and in any business, in any part of the world today, innovation has become far more central than it, I think, ever was. Because the world is changing faster and faster. If you just look around you, we are in a world where we routinely experience extreme weather, extreme climate events, extreme politics, extreme risks, whether it's geopolitical, cybersecurity, but there's also extreme invention. The way the world is changing, you think that, if you read certain bits of the news, you think there's never been a better time to be alive, right? And then you have to read the other half, and you can depress the hell out of you. So these 5 patterns are, I think, what we've called out as ways to think about innovation and things that have worked for other organizations. The first pattern, and you're probably familiar with this because there's a beautiful example downstairs of the set of things that have in the showcase there. And it was just a reminder that everything you see around you, every single object in this room, things that you see or don't see, have at some point of time been invented by somebody and didn't exist before. And it's a really interesting thought. So the story I want to tell you is about AT&T. And this goes back about 100 years, the early days of telephones. Telephones exist, but many other things don't. There is no long-distance calling, and AT&T have been given the task of making a long-distance call work from New York to San Francisco in a span of a couple of years, and everything needs to be invented. There is no dial tone. There is no hello at the end of a line because no one knows that's not been invented as yet. And the biggest problem is that they have this problem that they're vexed by distance because phone signals attenuate. You have to kind of, they don't carry that far. So they're experimenting with all kinds of things in terms of lines and materials. And that's what you call a problem-rich environment, right? Things like, whether it should be iron or copper, whether it should be thick or thin, even the poles in the ground, whether they will survive being buried in the ground and not corrode over the next 3 years, because they need to survive for decades. And as I said, dial tones and hellos still need to be invented. I'll spare you the longer story in the interest of time, but the upshot is that they did manage to kind of solve this problem by essentially creating one of the world's first industrial research establishments. They went out and hired scientists, right? And this wasn't common back in the day. So they went to the top universities, and they found a bunch of really, really clever people who were academicians, and they brought them in, and they created this industrial research setup, which allowed them to not only solve this problem, because they were able to actually make the call. They brought in Alexander Graham Bell and did the whole call, and Watson, come here, I need you, which is this famous opening line. Of course, Watson says, I'm in San Francisco, it'll take me some time to get there. But also this lab then over the next couple of decades created an enormous range of new inventions, which include things like radar and contribute to the Manhattan Project. And even satellite technology as we know it today, the microchip as we know it today, all came out of Bell Labs. So the idea of industrial research is a very powerful one, and a lot of companies today still continue to do this very successfully. And that's why I call it my first pattern. And you heard the Dyson example earlier, so I feel like I'm cheating a little bit. But the other side of the story is that it's been oft-cited that James Dyson created 5,000 plus prototypes before he was happy to launch the first model, right? And that's quite startling as a number if you think about it, because this is obviously before it's successful. This is before you've actually gotten something out into the shops. You're still experimenting in the garage, and that's the level of detail you have to go through. And so I think the big part of innovation that people don't get is everyone likes the glamour of innovation. We all like the outcome when it works. But actually 90% of innovation is doing stuff in the dark that no one likes, no one cares about. You're swimming upstream, you're trying to change rules that you're not allowed to change. So and you have to love that part of the work. Lots of areas that are currently very rife with research today, which include things like digital currencies. People are talking about fusion energy. We're talking about advanced materials, and this is all familiar to you, robotics. And again, we could go into details of each of these, but again, in the interest of time, I'll slip through this. I mean, AI is such a big event and such a hot topic today. It is fundamentally world-changing in the way that the internet was, I think. It is really a epochal piece of technology. And at the heart of it, over the last 20 years, if you dig the number of seminal research papers that have been published both by Google and by Microsoft and their OpenAI or DeepMind or all these guys, and they're all kind of building on each other, is quite staggering, right? Everything that we know from OpenAI about generative AI comes from a paper published by the Google scientists back in 2016. So research is not just restricted to one company. Obviously, there's a huge ecosystem of research that kicks in when it works. So I guess the question for each of us in our businesses is, what should we be researching? What is that core area where we want to push things forward in our businesses? My second pattern is adjacency. This is much less intellectually sophisticated, if you will, but no less beneficial or commercially viable. And the poster child of adjacency is Amazon, of course, because what Amazon did, and if you look at Jeff Bezos's 1998 letter to his investors, he says basically he's worked out that his entire business model depends on the price of bandwidth, storage, and compute. And these are declining at a rate of, they're halving in cost every 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months. And he basically says no other business can compete with this model. No retailer can compete with this level of this kind of economics. And of course, that plays out. But if you think about the way Amazon works, they kind of they never go for something that's way out there, right? They look at the next layer, the next slice. So they go from, if they're selling books, they'll sell you a Kindle. If they're doing, e-commerce, then they move into logistics. If they start with technology, then they move into cloud. So it's always the next slice, and therefore the rate of execution is amazing, right? Not to say that they don't have failures, but when you do adjacent innovation, I think you know a lot more about the domain, so you're not going into a domain blind. So Amazon Stories looks a little bit like this, and somewhere halfway down the line, all the analysts said, look, he doesn't have profits, and he ignored them, and of course then 5 years later, look, he's a genius, right? And that's how the world works sometimes. Microsoft does a good job of adjacent innovation, but a lot of it is through acquisitions rather than homegrown innovation. Adjacency also works in other parts of the business, other parts of the world today. You'll see companies like Legal & General, who are a financial services company, but because of a lot of their clients being older people who are looking at lifetime savings and asset management, they've decided to invest in what they call inspired villages, which is really retirement homes. It's an adjacent business for them. BT looks at a lot of stuff in your home. They look at technology, but in the way the healthcare is going, healthcare becomes an adjacency for technology. So BT has started to look at healthcare much more seriously. So these are ways in which we pick up the next slice that's closest to us and kind of try and make sense of it. And I guess the question for each of us here is, what's our adjacency? What is the thing that is next to our business where our competence will extend and we can actually get revenue out of it? Pattern 3 is moonshots. You're familiar with it. This is the bit of innovation that gets the most amount of press. And of course, Elon Musk, like him, hate him, tends to be the poster child of moonshots. Putting aside his personality, his traits, and his experiments with Twitter, I think if you look at some of his work in EVs and batteries, it's undeniable that he has changed the way that industry works. And the model here is a bit different from the picture you saw in Amazon. The Musk strategy is you aim for this world that doesn't exist currently. You just assume that the world will get there. It'll catch up with you. So you're building for this world that no one else has seen. It's like if we all collectively agree that we're going to build this great business model for, let's say, investment advice for people who are 150 years old, right? No one's 150 years old today, but maybe they will be at some point of time. And if you believe that was the case, we'd build this great model and wait for the world to catch up to that model. That's what's happening here. The moonshot model is all about that, right? So Musk does that. Google does a lot of that. Google does, obviously, they try to solve for death. So, they're really going out there, but more simpler, more here and now problems, such as, they have a lot of really interesting things in agriculture, obviously in healthcare, and so on and so forth. And so the moonshot strategy is a bit dangerous because you will be called crazy at various points, right? Halfway through, nobody knows if actually this picture ends well or not, right? This is the dangerous thing. You have to be really, really gutsy to pull this off, and it's not for everybody, right? You have to have deep pockets, real conviction, and an ability to truly, truly have the energy and the stamina to change the world. Not just restricted to tech, I'm happy to report that there are companies in the real world that do a really good job of moonshot, and Lego is a great example of that. The story of Lego is very interesting because they started as a wooden toy company. They spent one entire year's profits to buy the first injection molding machine in Denmark, and then kind of spend the next 10 years tinkering to try and get the Lego brick right. But once they got the Lego brick right, it kind of changed the universe for them. So they went from that to that, and the world of children was never the same again. Or if you stepped on a piece of Lego at any point of time, you'll know, it has a lasting impact. The thing about Lego is that its entire history is driven by these kind of big bets, right? Not just the initial jump. If I give you an example of great Lego projects into which they've really, really got behind and spent millions, how many of these are recognizable to you? I'd be surprised because they're all gigantic failures. None of them worked. They all cost millions, and many of them almost brought Lego to the brink of bankruptcy. Lego's a company that's been almost bankrupt about like half a dozen times in the last 60 years. Fortunately, other moonshots worked well, so it's all worked out in the end for them. So again, it's this moonshot means you're really rolling the dice on the big bets, and you're betting the company every time. Again, as I say, it's not for the faint-hearted. Pharma companies have to do that because the pharma business is built on finding the next wonder drug, so it's kind of win or bust. And COVID gave us a great example of the art of the possible. It is possible actually to do great things in a very short amount of time when we're pushed against the wall. And the question is not whether what moonshot you should do, but really you should ask yourself, do we need a moonshot? Does every company and every organization need a moonshot? It can be galvanizing, but it can be incredibly draining as well. And so you have to be really careful about how you balance that and what kind of energies you want to put behind it. The fourth habit is a really interesting one because it's a relatively new thing. And the example I will give you is from a company called Octopus. And some of you may have heard of Octopus, which is an energy provider. And Octopus has done a great job of becoming amongst the top 5 in what was always a very crowded market. The UK has always had a top 6 utility energy company business. And it was really hard for companies to break in because it was very regulated. It was very hard for smaller organizations. Octopus did a phenomenal job of getting into the top 5. But it didn't stop there, because what Octopus did was they eschewed the the traditional model of using the SAPs and Oracles, and they built their entire backend themselves, which again is quite a brave move. But having done that, they called it Kraken, and they went out and captured an enormous market share from the SAPs and Oracles in the utility space. So essentially, Oracle are saying, we understand this space. Our technology has been built for this industry, and we know how it works. You're not force-fitting a very complex piece of software to make it work for yourself. And they're doing amazingly well globally. I mean, from Australia to the US, every utility company is now considering Kraken as their back-end system for everything from billing to financial management and so on and so forth. So tech plays essentially is where you take your own industry, you build technology that is for your industry, and then you sell it to others. People who've done it successfully are people like Ocado, who came out of retail and logistics, people like Bosch, who have obviously gone very deeply into IoT and technology. Halfords are doing it for fleet management. So it's possible for any industry. You have to just think about which are the underserved areas of your industry from a tech perspective and deepen yourself in that area. And my last habit that I want to talk about, of course, is continuous innovation. This is the bedrock of everything else. All the other things that I've talked about kind of start here, because this is the habit. This is the real core everyday innovation and the commitment that you have to have. And no better examples of continuous innovation than very simple things like note-taking, right? You think that note-taking would be a really crowded space from when you could write a note, using Microsoft Text Edit or even before that on a basic notepad. But the number of products that continue to flourish in the note-taking space, really boggles the mind. And that's because it has evolved gradually from taking notes to effectively outsourcing your brain, right? Today, most note-taking systems will I think, quite successfully pitch themselves as ways in which to manage your entire mind space, right? To manage your memory. You don't have to remember anything. Just stick it in there, and it'll find it for you. But of course, things like British Cycling is a really brilliant example of marginal innovation. You've probably all heard the story of British Cycling, of how they went about improving the cyclic performance by looking at every marginal thing, such as bring your own pillow so you sleep better in an international meet, or how to wash your hands better. They got surgeons in to show the cyclists how to wash their hands better, because that 5% of feeling less than well because you didn't wash your hands and you picked up a bug can make the difference between a gold medal and a silver medal. So marginal innovation is all about eking out that last bit, and this is what most companies do. Formula One, I've taken both examples from sport, but Formula One is a brilliant example because 40, 50 years ago, the pit stop was about 50 seconds, right? Today it's under 10. And it wasn't one jump, right? It just continuously slicing off the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that's what all of us can do. 80% of all innovation is looking around us saying that could be better, and then going out and doing that. So those are my patterns: research, adjacency, moonshots, tech plays, technology innovation, everyday innovation, marginal stuff. There are some habits. There are things like how you fund it, how you structure it, how you build a culture, how you define goals, what kind of tools and processes you use. That's a conversation for another day. I will pause and hand back to you.